You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, the world has already reached into your mind. A notification vibrates. A headline screams. A message waits. Somewhere, someone is outraged. Somewhere else, someone is succeeding faster than you. Markets are shifting. Wars are trending. Opinions are colliding. And without ever leaving your bed, your nervous system is on high alert. This is the modern condition. We are more connected than ever, yet more emotionally volatile than any generation before us. A stranger's comment can ruin our afternoon. A piece of news can collapse our sense of security. A rumor can infect our mood. We scroll, and with every swipe, our emotional state is hijacked by forces we cannot see and barely understand. Why does everything affect us so deeply? Why does a minor rejection feel like a verdict on our worth? Why does uncertainty feel like danger? Why does losing control over money, reputation, relationships feel like psychological death? We are told that strength comes from power, from influence, from status, from shaping the world to our liking. We are told that if we could just earn more, fix more, control more, then peace would follow. But what if that assumption is the source of our suffering? Look closely at your stress, at your anger, at your anxiety. Most of it does not come from events themselves. It comes from what those events mean to you, from the stories your mind attaches to them, from the interpretations that transform neutral reality into personal threat. Two people lose the same job. One collapses into despair. The other sees opportunity. The event is identical. The internal response is not. What if the battlefield has never been out there? What if it has always been here? There once existed a philosophy built not for comfort, but for chaos. A psychological framework designed in an age of political instability, violence, exile, and uncertainty. It did not promise wealth. It did not promise safety. It promised something far more radical: emotional invincibility. It did not teach people how to control the world. It taught them how to control their perception of it. Most of us believe that strength means dominating circumstances. But what if true power lies in surrendering control over everything except one thing? Your judgment, your interpretation, your response. Imagine a mind so disciplined that praise cannot inflate it, insult cannot wound it, loss cannot shatter it. Not because it feels nothing, but because it understands something. In an empire built on hierarchy and brutality, there lived a man who owned nothing. No property, no political power, not even legal rights over his own body. He was born into slavery in ancient Rome. His master could injure him, humiliate him, even kill him without consequence. And yet, this man would later teach that freedom is not political, it is psychological. His name was Epictetus. He claimed that no one can truly harm you unless you allow them to control your judgment. That suffering is not imposed, is constructed. That the key to becoming unshakable lies not in reshaping the world, but in redefining what you believe about it. What did a man who owned nothing understand about control that we still fail to grasp in 2026? And more importantly, if he was right, what would that mean about the way you are living right now? Ancient Rome was not marble statues and philosophical debates in quiet courtyards. It was noise. It was hierarchy. It was power concentrated in the hands of a few and suffering distributed among the many. Wealth and brutality existed side by side. Emperors ruled with paranoia. Political alliances shifted like sand. Public humiliation was entertainment. Slavery was normal. In this world, a boy was born into bondage. His name was Epictetus. He did not begin life as a thinker. He began as property. Owned by a powerful Roman official, he had no legal identity of his own. His body was not his. His time was not his. Even his pain was not his to protest. One story claims that his master twisted his leg with such force that it broke. Whether literal or symbolic, the message remains the same. He lived under someone else's control. Imagine existing in a reality where your future depends entirely on the mood of another human being, where punishment requires no justification, where dignity is optional, and yet, from within this condition of absolute external powerlessness, emerged one of history's most radical ideas. You are free, not socially, not politically, not physically, but internally. Epictetus would later teach that while others can chain your body, they cannot chain your judgment unless you surrender it. They can insult you, but they cannot make you feel insulted without your participation. They can threaten you, but they cannot force you to interpret the threat as destruction. This was not motivational rhetoric. It was survival in a society obsessed with status, reputation, and dominance. Is embarrassment truly catastrophic? Or is it a fleeting human moment that most people will forget by tomorrow? You are not hurt by events. Epictetus made a distinction that would become the foundation of Stoic philosophy. There are things within your control, and there are things outside of it within your control. Your thoughts, your choices, your intentions, your responses outside your control. Your body, your wealth, your reputation, your social standing, other people's behavior, political outcomes, and the unpredictable machinery of fate. This is known as the dichotomy of control. At first glance, it sounds simple, almost obvious, but its implications are devastating. If something is outside your control, then suffering over it is irrational, not emotionally understandably. To invest your peace in something you do not command is to hand your psychological stability to chance. Rome was unstable. Emperors were assassinated. Citizens were exiled. Fortunes disappeared overnight. Public opinion could turn deadly. Epictetus did not teach optimism, because optimism would have been naive. He taught reality acceptance. Stoicism is not about pretending everything is good. It is about recognizing what is real and aligning your emotional investment. Accordingly, modern self-help often promises that you can manifest outcomes, shape destiny, bend the world toward your desires. Stoicism says something far less glamorous and far more liberating. You cannot control the world. You can only control your response to it, and that is enough. Look around at our own era. Economic uncertainty, political polarization, digital echo chambers engineered to provoke outrage, algorithms that monetize your attention and manipulate your fear, careers disrupted by automation, reputations destroyed by viral narratives, entire identities constructed on platforms that can erase you overnight. We believe we are free because we can choose what to watch and what to post. But emotionally, many of us are more reactive than any Roman citizen in the Colosseum. Our moods fluctuate with trends. Our self-worth fluctuates with metrics. Our sense of safety fluctuates with headlines. Epictetus lived in visible chains. We live in invisible ones. The difference is that his oppression was obvious. Ours is internalized, and this is the paradox that makes his philosophy so uncomfortable. If a slave under a volatile empire could cultivate inner peace by accepting what he could not control, then what excuse do we have? If he could detach his identity from status, pain, and circumstance, then what does it say about our dependence on likes, promotions, and approval? His life forces a confrontation. Maybe the world is not uniquely chaotic. Maybe human beings have always lived in uncertainty. Maybe what has changed is not reality, but our tolerance for it. Epictetus did not promise immunity from hardship. He promised immunity from unnecessary suffering. And he believed that suffering multiplies the moment we demand control over what was never ours to command. From his teachings, we can extract 10 psychological weapons, not for domination, not for suppression of emotion, but for mastery of perception. 10 principles designed to make you unbreakable, not because nothing happens to you, but because nothing owns you. And the first weapon begins with a simple question. What, exactly, is truly under your control? There is a quiet violence in wanting control over what was never yours to command. Epictetus reduced human suffering to a single confusion. We keep reaching beyond our jurisdiction. We exhaust ourselves trying to manipulate outcomes, people, systems, and perceptions that exist outside the boundaries of our authority. And then we call the resulting frustration, bad luck, injustice, or stress. The dichotomy of control is not a motivational slogan. It is a ruthless sorting mechanism. There are things within your control, your judgments, your intentions, your choices, your effort. You control whether you act with integrity. You control whether you respond with patience or aggression. You control the meaning you assign to events. You control your discipline. Everything else falls outside that circle. Your reputation, the economy, the weather, political decisions, other people's opinions, other people's loyalty, other people's moods, the timing of opportunities, the outcome of your effort. We intellectually understand this distinction. Emotionally, we reject it. Consider social media outrage. A stranger misinterprets your words. A comment goes viral. You feel misunderstood, attacked, exposed. You begin crafting mental rebuttals, replaying scenarios, imagining how to correct the narrative. But the perception others hold of you exists in their minds, not yours. The more you attempt to control it, the more your peace depends on strangers. Or consider workplace politics. You work diligently, yet a promotion goes to someone else. Resentment builds. You replay conversations, analyze office dynamics, question fairness. But the decision was shaped by. There is a truth so constant, so inescapable, that we build entire cultures to avoid thinking about it. You will die, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, at some unknown hour, on some unremarkable day. Your name will be spoken for the last time in the present tense. The projects you stress over will continue without you. The arguments you rehearse will dissolve. The notifications will stop mattering. The Stoics did not whisper this as a threat. They repeated it as a reminder. Memento mori. Remember that you will die in ancient Rome. Victorious generals were accompanied by someone who would quietly remind them of their mortality during triumph, not to diminish their achievement, but to anchor it. Power, fame, wealth, admiration, all temporary, all fragile. Mortality contemplation is not pessimism. It is precision. When you remember that your time is finite, trivial anxieties begin to lose their grip. Petty arguments shrink. Ego-driven conflicts feel absurd. The fear of embarrassment weakens. Procrastination becomes harder to justify. Death awareness sharpens focus because it eliminates illusion. It exposes how much of our stress is tied to temporary narratives. It asks an uncomfortable question. In the face of your own disappearance, what actually matters? Modern culture functions as if death is an administrative error. We hide it in hospitals. We sanitize it in language. We distract ourselves endlessly to avoid confronting it. Streaming platforms autoplay the next episode. Social media refreshes infinitely. The scroll never ends, but you do. Distraction culture thrives on the assumption that time is abundant. Mortality awareness shatters that assumption. It forces you to recognize that attention is your most limited resource. Psychologically, fear grows in avoidance. The less we confront death, the more terrifying it becomes in abstraction. It lingers as vague dread, surfacing in anxiety about aging, health, and loss. But when you face it directly, when you calmly acknowledge its inevitability, something shifts. The fear shrinks. Not because death becomes desirable, but because it becomes real, defined, inevitable, and therefore no longer shocking. When you accept that your life is temporary, you stop negotiating with nonsense. You stop delaying meaningful conversations. You stop chasing validation from people who will not remember you in a decade. You stop investing emotional energy in narratives that do not survive your own timeline. If today were your last day, what would still matter? Would the comment that offended you feel significant? Would the promotion you didn't receive define you? Would the image you curate online seem urgent? Or would you think about the people you love, the integrity of your choices, the courage you did or did not show, the moments you fully inhabited? Memento mori is not meant to darken your mood. It is meant to clarify your priorities. When you remember that you will die, life becomes less abstract, more immediate, more deliberate. You begin to see that the ultimate loss your own existence makes lesser losses easier to bear. If everything is temporary, then attachment must be balanced with appreciation. If time is finite, then presence becomes sacred. Death is not merely the end of life, it is the lens that gives life urgency. And when you truly accept it, something surprising happens. You stop fearing small endings, because you have already made peace with the final one. Desire feels innocent at first. A better phone, a higher salary, a more attractive partner, a larger audience, a stronger body, a more impressive life. Each want appears reasonable in isolation. But desire has a peculiar characteristic. It expands. It does not end when fulfilled. It recalibrates. The Stoics understood that unchecked desire is a subtle form of bondage. Not because wanting is wrong, but because needing is dangerous. They practiced moderation, not as moral superiority, but as psychological strategy. If your happiness depends on acquiring more, then your stability depends on forces outside your control. Markets must cooperate. Trends must align. People must approve. Circumstances must remain favorable, and they rarely do. Modern society is engineered to inflamed desire. Consumer culture thrives on dissatisfaction. Advertising does not sell products, sells identity upgrades. Social media amplifies comparison. You are constantly exposed to curated success, filtered beauty, optimized lifestyles. The baseline shifts daily. What was once a luxury becomes ordinary. What was once impressive becomes average. This is desire inflation. Psychologically, the dopamine system reinforces this cycle. Anticipation of reward generates excitement. Achievement produces a temporary spike. Then adaptation occurs. The new normal settles in, and the mind searches for the next escalation. More money, more attention, more novelty. The problem is not ambition. The problem is attachment. When your emotional state depends on obtaining what you currently lack, you live in a state of chronic insufficiency. There is always something missing, and that missing piece holds your peace hostage. Endless comparison intensifies this trap. You measure your life against someone else's highlight reel. Their success becomes evidence of your inadequacy. Their possessions become markers of your deficiency. Desire is no longer about improvement, becomes about validation. The Stoic solution is disarmingly simple. Want less, not in the sense of abandoning growth, but in redefining necessity. Food, shelter, meaningful work, relationships grounded in respect, these are sufficient for stability. Everything beyond that is optional. Optional things are easier to enjoy. Necessary things create anxiety. The more you need external upgrades to feel whole, the weaker you become. Because weakness is dependence. If your identity collapses without status, wealth, admiration, or stimulation, then you are not sovereign, you are contingent. Strength comes from reducing the number of conditions required for your contentment. Imagine needing less validation, less luxury, less stimulation. Suddenly, loss becomes less threatening. Competition becomes less consuming. Envy becomes less persuasive. When you master your desires, you regain leverage over your own mind. You choose what to pursue rather than being pulled by impulse. You act from intention, not craving. This is not suppression. It is calibration. Desire will always exist. But when it no longer dictates your peace, it becomes a tool instead of a tyrant. And in wanting less, you discover something unexpected. You feel richer. An insult appears on your screen. Before you consciously decide how to feel, something inside you ignites. Your heart rate shifts. Your jaw tightens. Your fingers hover over the keyboard. A response forms, not measured, not deliberate, but immediate. This is reaction. It is fast. It is emotional. It feels powerful. And it is often costly. The Stoics drew a crucial distinction between what happens to you and what you do next, between stimulus and response. There is a space, invisible, brief, but real. Within that space lies your freedom. When something occurs, criticism, a betrayal, a political headline, a rumor, your brain processes it at lightning speed. The amygdala, responsible for detecting threat, activates before rational analysis fully engages. This is useful in physical danger. It keeps you alive. But in social and psychological contexts, it can misfire. A comment online is not a predator. A disagreement is not an attack on survival. Yet the body reacts as if it is. If you act from that first surge, you surrender judgment to impulse. You react to respond, however, is different. It requires pause, reflection, a conscious decision about what aligns with your principles, rather than your emotions. In modern outrage culture, reaction is incentivized. Platforms reward immediacy. Anger spreads faster than nuance. The most emotionally charged content rises to visibility. This is not accidental. Emotional reactivity increases engagement. Engagement increases profit. If you are easily provoked, you are easily manipulated. Consider how often narratives are framed to trigger fear or anger. Headlines are designed to provoke. Sound bites are engineered to inflame. The goal is not clarity, is reaction. When you react automatically, you amplify the system that provoked you. But when you pause, you interrupt it. Emotional reactivity feels empowering in the moment. It gives the illusion of strength. But true strength is restraint. It is the ability to choose your posture rather than default to it. If someone can provoke you at will, they control you, not your body, not your schedule, but your state. Imagine an individual who knows exactly which words unsettle you, which topics trigger you, which insecurities ignite you. With minimal effort, they can dictate your mood. That is power. The Stoic refuses to hand over that leverage. This does not mean suppressing emotion. Anger, sadness, frustration, they arise naturally. The question is whether they dictate behavior. When you create a pause between stimulus and response, you reclaim authorship. You ask, what is actually happening? What part of this is under my control? What outcome do I want to create? Sometimes the response is silence. Sometimes it is calm disagreement. Sometimes it is strategic withdrawal. But it is chosen, not reflexive, in a culture that rewards immediacy. The pause becomes revolutionary. It disrupts cycles of escalation. It prevents regret. It preserves dignity. Most conflicts are not caused by events themselves, but by compounded reactions. One insult leads to retaliation. Retaliation leads to escalation. Escalation leads to rupture. All of it fueled by impulses that were never examined. To respond instead of react is to operate above manipulation. It is to become less predictable, less exploitable, and when you master that gap, however small, it becomes clear that your greatest power was never factors outside your command, biases, preferences, hidden agendas, timing. Your effort was yours. The outcome was not. Relationships follow the same pattern. You can offer honesty, loyalty, affection, but you cannot force reciprocation. You cannot compel someone to stay, to understand, to evolve at your pace. When we attempt to control another person's emotional landscape, we create the very instability we fear. Psychologically, this confusion stems from a distorted sense of agency. We overestimate our influence over external systems and underestimate our influence over internal interpretation. Modern psychology calls this cognitive reframing, the ability to reinterpret events in ways that reduce emotional harm. Emotional regulation depends on recognizing where our power truly lies. When something happens, there is a gap between stimulus and response. In that gap lives judgment. That judgment determines whether an event becomes devastation or inconvenience. If you lose money and interpret it as proof that you are incompetent, suffering multiplies. If you interpret it as information lesson, a recalibration, your emotional stability remains intact. The event is external. The meaning is internal. Most suffering arises not from reality, but from resistance to reality, from demanding that the world align with our preferences, from insisting that uncertainty disappear, from expecting permanence in a system defined by change. We try to control inflation. We try to control public opinion. We try to control how others perceive us. We try to control outcomes that depend on variables far beyond our reach. And when those variables shift as they inevitably do experience the shift as personal injury. But what if injury requires participation? Epictetus argued that when you attach your peace to what you cannot control, you surrender sovereignty. You become emotionally dependent on circumstances. You become predictable, manipulable, reactive. Control what you can, your effort, your ethics, your discipline, your perspective. Ignore the rest not with apathy, but with clarity. The weather may ruin your plans. The market may collapse. Someone may betray you. None of these events ask for your permission, but your interpretation does. And here is the uncomfortable realization. The more you attempt to control what lies outside your authority, the less control you retain over yourself. What if peace is not achieved by expanding your control, but by strategically surrendering it? A message arrives. 3 words. We regret to inform you. In that instant, nothing physical has happened to you. No injury, no loss of oxygen, no immediate threat to survival, and yet your chest tightens. Your thoughts accelerate. A quiet sense of collapse spreads through your body. What changed? An event occurred. Words on a screen, air vibrations shaped into sound. But the suffering did not begin with the event. It began with interpretation. The Stoics insisted on something that feels almost offensive at first. Events are neutral. It is our judgments about them that create pain. Rejection is a perfect example. Someone chooses not to continue a relationship. On the surface, this is a decision, a divergence of paths. But the mind rarely stops there. It begins constructing a narrative. I'm not enough. I was never valued. I'll always be abandoned. Within minutes, the original event is buried under layers of meaning. The rejection is no longer a mismatch. It becomes evidence of inadequacy. The pain intensifies, not because of what happened, but because of what it supposedly reveals about you. Failure operates the same way. You launch a project, it collapses. Financially, the loss is measurable. But psychologically, the damage multiplies when the mind interprets failure as identity. I am incompetent. I am behind. I have wasted my time. The event was an outcome. The suffering is the story. Public embarrassment follows an identical pattern. You misspeak in a meeting. You trip in front of others. A comment is misinterpreted. For a brief moment, there is discomfort. But then the imagination expands the scene beyond reality. You picture others replaying it, mocking it, judging you for weeks. The embarrassment transforms into humiliation, not because people are thinking about you endlessly, but because you are. The human brain is a narrative machine. It does not simply record events. It explains them. It predicts consequences. It assigns blame. It constructs identity from isolated moments. This capacity is powerful. It allows us to learn from mistakes, to anticipate danger, to create meaning. But it also amplifies suffering far beyond the scale of reality. A single criticism becomes proof of worthlessness. A temporary setback becomes permanent doom. A misunderstanding becomes social exile. Modern psychology, particularly cognitive behavioral approaches, quietly echoes what the Stoics understood centuries ago. Emotions follow thoughts. Change the interpretation, and the emotional intensity shifts. Not because you are denying reality, but because you are examining it more carefully. The Stoic does not say, "This is fine," when something painful happens. The Stoic asks, "What is actually happening here?" Is rejection truly proof of inadequacy? Or is it simply incompatibility? Is failure truly evidence of incompetence? Or is it data feedback about strategy, timing, or preparation? You are hurt by the story you attach to them. This idea is unsettling because it removes an external villain. If suffering is constructed internally, then the responsibility shifts. It does not mean you are to blame for pain inflicted by others. It means that your prolonged suffering depends on the narrative you choose to sustain. There is a subtle power hidden here. If interpretation creates suffering, interpretation can also dissolve it. The event may remain unchanged. The past cannot be edited, but the meaning assigned to it is flexible. If this is true, then you are not as fragile as you thought. You are not at the mercy of circumstance to the degree you imagined. Your mind is not merely reacting to reality, is shaping it, and that realization is both liberating and terrifying. Because if your interpretation is the source of much of your suffering, then it is also the source of your freedom. Most people spend their lives trying not to think about what they fear. We avoid conversations about death. We silence thoughts about losing our job. We push away the possibility of illness. We distract ourselves from the fragility of status, relationships, and security. Modern culture encourages this avoidance. Stay positive, we're told. Manifest abundance. Focus only on what you want. But buried beneath this constant optimism is a quiet anxiety. Because deep down, we know how unstable everything is. The Stoics practiced something radical. Premeditatio malorum the. Premeditation of misfortune at first glance. It sounds pessimistic. Why would anyone intentionally imagine losing what they love? Why visualize failure, poverty, rejection, or death? Isn't that inviting negativity? But the Stoic intention was not it was preparation. Imagine, briefly, that you lose your job. Not in a dramatic, catastrophic way. Just a simple meeting. A polite explanation. A shift in direction. Now imagine how you would respond. Where you would cut expenses. Who you would call. What skills you could rely on. Notice the fear that surfaces and then notice that you are still breathing. Imagine losing status. The admiration fades. The applause stops. You become ordinary. What remains? Who are you without external validation? Imagine, with sobriety, that your health declines, that your body weakens, that your time is finite. What would suddenly matter more? What trivial anxieties would evaporate? Premeditatio malorum is not about expecting disaster. It is about removing its power to paralyze you. Psychologically, exposure reduces fear. When the mind repeatedly confronts a possibility in a controlled way, it stops reacting as if the scenario is immediate danger. Avoidance, on the other hand, magnifies anxiety. The less we allow ourselves to consider worst-case outcomes, the more monstrous they become in imagination. Modern anxiety thrives on suppression. We refuse to look at what scares us, so it grows in the shadows. We distract ourselves with entertainment, consumption, endless scrolling, anything to avoid confronting uncertainty. But uncertainty does not disappear. It waits. The Stoic chooses to look directly by mentally rehearsing loss. You train your nervous system to tolerate it. You remind yourself that survival does not depend on perfection. You discover that you are more adaptable than you assumed, and something unexpected happens. Gratitude intensifies. When you contemplate losing your home feels less ordinary. When you contemplate losing a relationship, conversations feel less routine. When you contemplate mortality, time feels sharper, more defined, more precious. Negative visualization does not make life darker. It makes it clearer. It strips away entitlement. It replaces complacency with appreciation. It replaces fragile optimism with grounded resilience. When you mentally rehearse loss, life stops terrifying you, because you realize that even in the absence of what you fear losing, something essential remains, your capacity to respond, and that capacity, unlike wealth, status, or circumstance, cannot be taken without your consent. There is a subtle but profound difference between enduring your life and embracing it. Most people tolerate reality. They grit their teeth through setbacks. They get through heartbreak. They deal with disappointment. Beneath their composure is resistance, a quiet insistence that this should not be happening. The Stoics proposed something far more radical than endurance, a more fatty love of fate, not mere acceptance, not reluctant tolerance. Love, at first, this sounds absurd. How can you love failure? How can you love betrayal? How can you love illness, rejection, or loss? Isn't that self-deception? But amor fati does not mean celebrating pain. It means recognizing that every event, especially the unwanted ones, forms the architecture of your character. Passive resignation says, "There's nothing I can do. It is heavy, defeated, lifeless." Active acceptance says, "This is happening. Now how will I use it?" The difference is subtle but transformative. One collapses under circumstance. The other metabolizes it. Imagine a career setback. You are overlooked for a position you believed was yours. Months of effort dissolve in a single decision. Passive resignation whispers, "The system is unfair. Why try again?" Resistance festers. Bitterness grows. Energy drains. Active acceptance asks a different question. What does this require of me now? Perhaps it demands new skills. Perhaps it forces independence. Perhaps it exposes misplaced loyalty. The event itself has not changed, but its role in your development has. Or consider heartbreak. A relationship ends. Plans evaporate. Identity feels fractured. Resistance says, "This should not have happened." You replay memories. You analyze every detail. You fight reality long after it has concluded. Acceptance says, "It happened. It hurts. And it is part of my story." In that shift, pain becomes movement rather than stagnation. Resistance multiplies suffering because it demands a different past. It argues with facts. It creates an internal war against what already exists. And no one wins a war against reality. The Stoics believed that the obstacle is not blocking your path. It is the path. What you call disruption may be direction. What you call injustice may be instruction. This does not mean every event is good. It means every event can be used. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote privately about this principle while facing plague, betrayal, and political chaos. He reminded himself that events are neither cruel nor kind. They are raw material. The impediment to action advances action, he observed. The barrier becomes the training ground. Amor fati transforms victimhood into agency, not because you control fate, but because you control your posture toward it. In the modern world, we are conditioned to curate outcomes, to optimize life, to eliminate friction. When something disrupts the plan, we interpret it as malfunction. But existence has never promised convenience. Economic downturns will occur. Technology will disrupt industries. People will leave. Bodies will age. Plans will collapse. You can spend your life demanding that fate conform to your expectations, or you can decide that whatever fate delivers becomes part of your strategy. To love fate is to trust that growth often hides inside discomfort. It is to stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this preparing me for? When you adopt amor fati, nothing is wasted. No humiliation, no failure, no loss exists without potential transformation. And in that transformation, something extraordinary happens. You stop fearing the future, because whatever comes becomes fuel. There is a quiet addiction that defines our age. It does not come in bottles or powders. It comes in numbers, views, likes, shares, promotions, titles, approval, external. External validation has become the invisible currency of modern identity. We measure our worth in reactions. We evaluate our lives through comparison. We calibrate our behavior based on how it will be perceived, and then we wonder why we feel unstable. The Stoics warned against this long before algorithms existed. Praise and blame, they argued, are external events. They exist in the minds of others. To anchor your emotional state to them is to outsource your stability. Think about what happens when someone praises you. There is a surge of pleasure, a confirmation, a subtle relief that you are seen favorably. Now imagine that same person criticizes you tomorrow. The pleasure collapses. Doubt enters. Anxiety follows. If your self-concept rises and falls with opinion, then you are not self-governing. You are crowd-governed. Social media amplifies this dynamic to an extreme. A post performs well, and your mood lifts. It underperforms, and you question your relevance. A comment section becomes a courtroom. Strangers become jurors. Your sense of value becomes subject to public vote. But even outside digital platforms, the pattern persists. At work, reputation shapes opportunity. In relationships, approval influences belonging. In society, status determines access. The desire for respect is natural. The need for it is dangerous. Psychologically, dependence on validation creates emotional slavery because it ties your peace to variables you cannot control. You cannot control how others interpret you. You cannot control their biases, insecurities, projections, or shifting loyalties. When you live for approval, you begin performing. You edit your thoughts. You soften your convictions. You avoid necessary conflict. You choose what is applauded over what is authentic. Ask yourself, honestly, are you living or performing? Performance is exhausting because it requires constant monitoring. You become hyper-aware of perception. Every action is filtered through imagined reaction. You are no longer acting from principle, but from anticipated applause. The Stoic approach is not indifference to morality. It is indifference to reputation. There is a difference. You should care about acting with integrity. You should not care whether everyone recognizes it. Praise does not make you better. Criticism does not make you worse. Both are opinions, temporary interpretations shaped by incomplete information. When you detach from validation, something uncomfortable happens at first. Silence, fewer affirmations, less immediate feedback. It can feel isolating, but beneath that discomfort lies autonomy. when you no longer require approval to feel stable. Your decisions become clearer. You can speak honestly without calculating backlash. You can pursue meaningful work even if it lacks glamour. You can endure misunderstanding without collapse. Dependence on approval fragments identity. Independence consolidates it. This does not mean becoming cold or antisocial. It means recognizing that your character is determined by your choices, not by applause. External validation is unpredictable. Crowds are fickle. Trends shift. Reputations fluctuate. But your principles can remain steady. And when they do, something changes. You stop asking, "How am I perceived?" You start asking, "Am I aligned with who I claim to be?" In that shift, performance ends and living begins. Most people interpret obstacles as interruptions. Something stands in the way of the plan. And immediately it is labeled unfair, inconvenient, or unnecessary. We imagine a smoother version of reality, one where progress is linear, success is uninterrupted, and discomfort is minimal. When life deviates from that fantasy, frustration appears. The Stoics saw obstacles differently. To them, adversity was not interference. It was instruction. Imagine a muscle that is never challenged. It remains soft. It weakens over time. Strength emerges only when resistance is applied, when fibers are strained, when discomfort signals adaptation. Without resistance, there is no growth. The Stoics applied this logic to the mind. An insult tests emotional regulation. Financial hardship tests discipline. Failure tests resilience. Betrayal tests judgment. Each obstacle reveals weaknesses that comfort keeps hidden. Modern life, especially in developed societies, has minimized physical hardship. Climate control shields us from weather. Food is abundant. Entertainment is constant. Convenience is prioritized. On the surface, this appears as progress, and in many ways it is. But psychologically, excessive comfort breeds fragility. When every inconvenience feels intolerable, when every delay feels catastrophic, when minor discomfort triggers disproportionate distress, it suggests not cruelty in the world, but underdeveloped resilience. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort precisely to prevent this fragility. They would fast occasionally, not because they lacked food, but to remind themselves that hunger would not destroy them. They would sleep on harder surfaces, wear simpler clothing, walk instead of ride. Not to perform asceticism, but to rehearse resilience. Voluntary discomfort builds psychological confidence. When you choose hardship, you transform it from threat into training. Cold showers, difficult conversations, physical exertion, intellectual challenges. Each becomes a rehearsal for unpredictability. In contrast, a culture obsessed with comfort becomes hypersensitive. We avoid discomfort at all costs. We silence dissent rather than debate it. We quit tasks when they become demanding. We escape boredom instantly. The result is not peace, it is dependency on ideal conditions. But life does not guarantee. Ideal conditions. Economic downturns occur. Relationships strain. Health fluctuates. Projects fail. If you have never trained your mind to endure difficulty, these moments feel like personal injustice. The Stoic perspective is stark. Hardship is not injustice. It is preparation. An obstacle does not appear to punish you. It appears to refine you. This does not romanticize suffering. Some pain is tragic. Some loss is profound. But even within unavoidable hardship, there is an opportunity to strengthen what remains under your control, your character, your composure, your judgment. When you begin to see obstacles as mental gym equipment, your posture shifts. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is this training in me?" Patience, discipline, courage, detachment. Every challenge contains a lesson disguised as inconvenience. And when you stop avoiding resistance, you stop fearing it, because you realize something powerful. The very things you once wished away were shaping you into someone unbreakable.